On the 9th of July in 2011, South Sudan would for the first time govern itself as an independent state. The independence ushered with it a new birth of economic opportunities that the young nation would look to its neighbors to provide. Ugandans spotted the opportunity and jumped for it. In just a year of being in South Sudan, exports from Uganda would flood the South Sudan market, making it Uganda's most preferred export capital. By 2008, Uganda was exporting almost 4 trillion shillings to Juba. Business was booming, bringing with it an increased number of Ugandans seeking to make ends meet in Juba. A conservative estimate placed the number of Ugandans living in Juba by the end of last week at 9,000. But the young nation would soon split into factions within the ruling party, SPLA. One faction loyal to Kiir and another loyal to his second-in-command, Riek Machar. It would spend the next 3 of its 6 years of independence engulfed in a bloody civil war in which over 500,000 people were killed and 2 million others displaced. Most of these in Uganda. When a semblance of peace returned, trade flourished. Many more Ugandans returned, but they would, on Friday last week, be left begging for evacuation after a shootout killed over 270 people. The UPDF was on hand to answer that call. On the morning of 14th July, the army prepared its trucks at the Bibia Army Detach, inviting us to join them as they crossed into South Sudan. I am standing right now at the Bibia Army Detach, which is just 20 kilometers from the border between Uganda and South Sudan. What you see behind me is the artillery force, the light force that the army said will go into South Sudan to rescue Ugandans that are now settled in Nisitu, which is the assembly point. We have understood from sources that this force will be moving in that direction any minute from now. It was a journey of many threats, and indeed, the army readied a convoy to march with it. At the border, negotiations with SPLA would take almost 30 minutes before bearing fruit. On the other side of the border, the UPDF convoy slowly snaked its way into the hilly Nimuli town, guided by the SPLA convoy at the front. An air support drone surveilled from the sky as we moved. On the road, the deadly image of South Sudan's highway became even more visible when we found cars that had freshly been burnt and abandoned. As we crossed the Ayi Bridge, the military convoy slowed down, and it became even more apparent that we were now in a dangerous zone. It was at this time that the gunshots went off. We were in the middle of an ambush, and the military convoy ground to a complete halt.
Oh, you man.
Soldiers readied themselves in position as we, the civilians, ducked for cover underneath a truck. The tanks turned back to confront a quote-unquote the enemy. 30 minutes into the ambush, together with my colleague Solomon Kawesa, we would take what we thought would be our very last photos. The wait ensued, and soon we'd shed off the scales of fear and come out of our hiding places. Well, we're just a few meters away from the Ayi Bridge, about 20 kilometers behind there. We've been told to wait in the convoy. We don't know what has happened at the back there. We're just waiting to get more information on what might have happened. We would later learn that 3 soldiers in the convoy were injured in the ambush.
We had a small incident where some armed guys shot at our convoys, and they injured 3 of our soldiers, but our soldiers are now stable.
We arrived at Nisitu camp a little after 5 p.m. after spending 9 hours driving along a 330-kilometer road. At night's fall, we crammed into a military tent and lay to the floor for the night after feeding on a sumptuous meal of posho and beans. The morning sun pierced through the Nisitu skies with rage. It shone a light for some of our colleagues to say their prayers, and we did treat ourselves to porridge for breakfast that was prepared by the service brigade. Our arrival into the capital, Juba, was greeted with long lines of cars and bikes in the search for fuel. Ugandans who noticed the UPDF convoy cheered on. At Gumbo Market, a convoy of cars was on hand waiting to be evacuated. Many people scampered for the lorries that had been earlier reserved for children and women. As our convoy drove out of Juba, it became even more apparent that the South Sudan economy had suffered a blow. It was joy unfettered as the convoy finally reached the border in Elegu. For many of the Ugandans that have been living in South Sudan, this really represents the light at the end of a very long tunnel that they've had to bear in South Sudan for the past few days. Raymond, Mujuni, NTV.